Hello, my name is Neil Bindemann, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today and to have this opportunity to talk to you about some of the evidence to explore how correcting an imbalance in emotional health can help us in rebalancing our immune system. But for some of us, we may not have heard of this term emotional health before. And so I think it's important to explore what it actually is. And to do that, let's look at what emotions are. Emotions, as defined in this slide, are just a complex experience of consciousness, bodily sensation, and behavior. And actually, it was back in 1997 when Dr. Candace Pert, neuroscientist in America, who discovered the opioid receptor, really brought the significance of emotions to the fore in terms of the nature of emotions being chemical. And here she talks about the fact that it's about releasing molecules that produce from body cells across the brain and spine, and that this can lead to changes in the person's feeling of well-being. But what triggers that release? What triggers their release, I should say? Well, that has got to come down to the experiences that we can have through our development and childhood, and also through later life, and maybe work-related experiences and other experiences that we have. But those emotions, we need to explore how we perceive those experiences. And generally, we tend to group them into positive and negative emotions, but they have a purpose as well. And I think that can often get forgotten. Those emotions, they can drive our actions, and they tell others that we may be dealing with stresses. And they obviously tell others how we're generally feeling in terms of whether we've got smiles on our faces, etc. But there is something even more significant and maybe deeper, and that is there is some wisdom associated with those emotions. They're telling us that something important in our life is changing or needs attention, and therefore it's vitally important that we really do take notice of those. And if we don't take notice of those, that's when perhaps we come across problems, and that I will explore in more detail. But that wisdom is something that we've come to see as emotional intelligence. And that wisdom, well, when we look at it, it's relating to survival in many ways. And if we turn the positive and the negative around and we look at it from a point of view safe and secure or fight or flight, then we can see perhaps that the function of our emotions are more significant as well. But what is it then what do we mean by emotional health? Well, it is that uninterrupted two-way bi-directional relationship that enables the timely and appropriate free expression of all emotions, nourishing our health and wellness, i.e., we must allow those emotions to be expressed. And it's when we don't allow those that perhaps we have an issue. Well, what, if anything, can impact our emotional health? Well, it was back in 2020 when we began to run a survey, and it was a very significant survey that looked and brought together over 600 lived experiences. And in that survey, we asked them if they could share with us emotion words were important to them. And at the same time, we asked them if they had some form of experience, a major life event. And we split that into two categories of those who'd had trauma and those who didn't. And as you'll see here, the word anxious is in both of those. It's high up in the top, and that probably reflects the fact that this was done during COVID. But here you can see the significant difference between emotions of people with no trauma and those with trauma in terms of what they shared, in terms of the words that came up for them. Now, the full emotional impact of anxiety can be shown here when we looked at people who did not express anxiety or did not select anxious as one of their emotions. Their other emotions came up quite high, quite positive. And those who mentioned anxious, obviously there was a high number of those, 454. you can see what else happened in their life and what was happening in terms of other aspects of their emotions. But what can happen in terms of the significance of trauma in terms of unbalancing emotional health? We need to look at that from point of view, the impact of a physical trauma, perhaps through the brain and body. And that came in the shape of where I heard things going on for myself when I had a block in physical energy due to a tumor that was sitting on my pineal gland, right bang in the middle. And that was significant, but because it had blocked the cerebral spinal fluid flow. And this is actually taken from a video that was shown, it's on YouTube and on TED, showing you how during at night time, the brain washes through, and that's part of the function of the cerebral spinal fluid. So when that doesn't happen, it can have a significant impact on aspects to do with brain function and other areas. And that's exactly what happened for me. In terms of the consequences of that flow that you're seeing here, not happening, basically that tumor in my brain led to disrupted balance, impaired memory. It also had led to broken sleep and then muddled thinking. And on top of all that, I had this very significant loss of awareness of space and time. But this aspect of what's going on here with a physical block can actually be relayed, I would say, also in terms of what can happen in terms of a more non-physical block, and a block in terms of whether we're allowing our thoughts to flow or whether we're allowing our emotions to flow. And that is where I see this as a sort of disruption in the flow of our consciousness. And how does that play out? It can play out in both pain in terms of a body related pain or pain that can be connected into mind. And those two pain, the pain that from that is very much in connection with migraine and fibromyalgia. How does the science tell us this about migraine and fibromyalgia? Well, this is where the research has come in from point of view of CGRP and the work that's been going on in that for quite a few years now. And you will see in this graph that CGRP is a very, very major vasodilating peptide. It binds to cells across the body, and it also is related to the release into the body in terms of stress and anxiety. What I'm going to quickly go through here is to show you that I've been involved in some research with CGRP in my PhD, showing that it actually binds to cells in the immune system and also cells of the central nervous system as well. And then earlier in 97, we know that the link with migraine has started when Michael Moscovitz was looking at the link between the migraine and the trigeminal nerve. And as I said earlier, my PhD showing you here is some illustrations of CGRP flowing through the axons in the nerves and the sciatic nerve, and also where it binds to the cell receptors of macrophages. Now, how does this tell us about the significance in terms of emotional health and also in the immune system? Well, it actually starts from point of view of the dental bite plate, which again does connect into the trigeminal nerve, because the dental bite plate is something that's used a lot for stress and anxiety in terms of teeth grinding. And as you'll see here, some papers highlighting the link between bruxism and PTSD, and obviously then the emotional issues related to PTSD in terms of childhood and in migraine. And here you can see problems in terms of connection between emotional health and the history of migraine as well. So emotional problems in terms of childhood issues, adverse childhood events, and then the risk of migraine in future life. But this was the biggest breakthrough in 21 when Peter Goadsby worked on the research that Michael Moscovitz had uncovered, and eventually through working with the pharmaceutical industry, they developed a new drug. And this is a drug that binds to CGRP. Now, the significance of all that comes in this aspect of how CGRP levels can increase in the body at the wrong times. And when something goes up, as we all know, Newton's laws, it also has to come down. So we need to get back down to that balance point. But if CGRP is getting released at certain times due to stress, etc., it's getting circulated around the body. Now, if let's say that person is not wishing to express certain emotions because, as we said earlier on, they're suppressing them, very uncomfortable, don't wish to have those. Well, the tissue cells that are involved in certain emotions like anger, etc., which would involve CGRP, they are no longer able to show their receptors. And therefore, that means CGRP increases. And as that increases up, that means that we're going to see a large volume. So how do we get that CGRP to go down? Because what goes up has to come down, because we need to get that metabolic balance. So this is where we can see, for example, if it is up high and there are cells in the immune system that are actually got receptors for it, that CGRP gets metabolized away, reduced, but it binds to the mast cells, for example. It also can bind to the cells in the brain called the microglia, and that is where the link with migraine can happen as well. And as it shows you here, the study shows you connections with migraine. So this is also just coming to the end to demonstrate how there is now also a link with fibromyalgia and the same molecule. And I'm just going to end by just explaining that this work I've gone through today is very much focused on a shift in what we know, what used to be called the germ theory, in terms of the role that this has and significance to the immune system, and the fact that more and more work is now showing that that was wrong, and we now have something called the host theory, and that therefore this is very significant when it comes to understanding how the immune system can get out of balance, etc., due to emotional health. So thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, I am very happy to take them.